Okay, so this is these two problems are going to be review. So we're kind of reviewing what we've done. But how do you know that this is a quadratic equation? I know I wrote it out, but how do you know that it's quadratic? How could you tell? So yeah, so if you were to FOIL this out, when you get a 4x squared and then minus 12x plus 9, so yeah, so if you were to FOIL it out, you get the largest degree term being 2. So it is quadratic. But the way it's written, how would you solve this quadratic equation? Square root property. So remember, you can use the square root property. You use the square root property to have some expression squared equal a number. So you have to have a number on that other side, and on this side you have to have some expression squared, and I do have that here. Now what some of you are forgetting to do is this. So if I'm going to use the square root property, I'm going to go ahead and rewrite this over. And I take the square root of both sides. What else must I write? Plus or minus. Because remember, when we first started talking about this, we looked at the easiest example you can think of, like x squared equal 4. So what are the solutions to x squared equal 4? X squared equal 4, what are the solutions? Plus or minus 2, right? A positive 2. 2 times 2 is 4, and also a negative 2 times negative 2 is 4, isn't it? So when we did that, we saw that in order to get that plus or minus 2, you had to, when you took the square root of both sides, you had to write out plus or minus, like we did here. And so you get x equal plus or minus 2. So don't forget about using that idea here. So there are actually two solutions. So I need to write out plus or minus right there, which is some of you are forgetting to do. So in that worksheet that's due Thursday, don't forget it's plus or minus that you have to write. And so then the square and the square root undo each other, so I get 2x minus 3 equals plus or minus the square root of 24. Okay, so that's where I'm at. But the directions will also say simplify if possible. So can I simplify the square root of 24? Yes. Yeah, because you know that what perfect square goes into 24? 4. So it'll be 4 times 6. You're going to rewrite that as. And then the square root of 4 is 2, so you get 2 square root of 6. So that's what this is. So I get 2x minus 3 equals plus or minus 2 square root of 6. All right. We also talked about whether the solutions are rational or irrational. So based on what I have right here, are these solutions going to be rational or irrational? They're going to be irrational. See, these right here, are these solutions rational or irrational that I'm pointing to? Those are rational. So whenever you end up with a square root still, that's going to be an irrational number. And remember, we did a whole page, if you go back to the notes, we did a whole page where we talked about rational and irrational. So if you can't remember that, make sure you go back and review that page. But this is going to be irrational. So, and that's important because if it's rational, you want to write the solutions a different way than if it were irrational. So if it's irrational, there are kind of two ways you can write your answers. So at this point, you could say, all right, well, 2x minus 3 equals 2 square root of 6. And then 2x minus 3 equals what? Negative 2 square root of 6. And then we've got to solve for x. So to get x by itself, I'm going to have to add 3 to both sides. And then a negative 3 and a 3 is 0. Now here's where you're going to mess up. You're going to say 2x equal. Now what should be on this side right here? What's this? I'm not going to say because I don't want to give it away, but what is this that I'm circling? What's that the same as? Was that the same as? Tell me what you write. You think it's 5 square root of 6?
No, it's
Why isn't it 5 square root of 6? Because they're not like terms. Very good. If this was 5 square root of 6, you can't just say 3 plus 2. Because if this were, if I wanted this to be 5 square root of 6, and this better be 3 what? Square root of 6. 3 square root of 6 plus 2 square root of 6 is 5 square root of 6. But those are not like terms. So all you can do is write it as 3 plus 2 square root of 6. That's all you can do. And now how do you get x by itself? Divide both sides by 2. So your solution is x equal 3 plus 2 square root of 6 divided by 2. And leave your answer like that. Don't do anything else to this. You're done. So that's one of your solutions. Now let's do the other one. So the other one, you're going to do the same thing. You're going to say add 3 to both sides. And now you're going to say 2x equal, now how are you going to write this side? Say it again. Now, always put the you see how I have that plus and minus right here? Always put that at the end. So don't say negative 2 square root of 6 plus 3. It's better to say what? Better say 3 minus 2 square root of 6. Okay? And now do what? Divide by 2. I'm going to go ahead and rewrite this over. And so I get x to be 3 minus 2 square root of 6 all over 2. So those are your two solutions. Now, in my math lab, this is how you would have to write it. You have to write it as separate solutions with a comma between them. But the other way you could have written your answer is this way. So again, this is rational or irrational?
Irrational.
Irrational. So leave it as plus or minus 2 square root of 6. So in other words, I'm saying this. So all I did was I rewrote this. So I'm going to add 3 just like I did here. Add 3. Now, the preferable way to write this side is to say plus and minus last. So what are you going to say? 3 plus or minus 2 square root of 6. One more step and you're done. What's the next step? Divide both sides by 2. And so you get x is 3 plus or minus 2 square root of 6 over 2. So this is a more compact way of writing these two. They mean the same thing. You see that, right? Because this is 3 plus 2 square root of 6 over 2, which is what this is. And then 3 minus 2 square root of 6 over 2, which is what this is. Okay? So on your test 3, you're going to have one where you have to use the square root property. We also talked about this, though, with regards to the square root property. Suppose we had this. 3x plus 1 squared equal a negative 36. What kind of equation is this? Quadratic. What's the best way to solve this particular quadratic equation? Square root property. That's the more efficient way. But remember, when I take the square root of both sides, I need to remember that I've got to write it as plus or minus the square root of a negative 36. Now let's remember something about the square root of a negative 36.
Imaginary.
Yeah, you end up with imaginary solutions. So I can write this as the square root of a negative 1 times the square root of 36, right? And what's the square root of negative 1 the same as? As imaginary number I. And the square root of 36 is 6. So this becomes, the square root and the square root don't do each other. So this becomes 3x plus 1 equals plus or minus 6i. Now, there on that worksheet that you have due next class period, what some students I've seen did was they said that this is no real solution. You're right. The square root of a negative number is not a real number, but you now know that you're not going to say no real solutions because now you know that There are what kind of numbers now? Imaginary numbers. So you got to actually work it out. All right, so you do agree that this is not a real number, right? Okay, 6i is not a real number. These are imaginary. Now here's how you can write it though. You can write this just like you did the irrational solutions. In other words, you can write it as, you can break it apart just like this, write as two separate solutions. So you would say 3x plus 1 equals 6i, and what's the other? Plus 1 equal a negative 6i, and then you get x by itself. So you subtract 1, and so you get 3x equal, now how are you going to write this?
5y.
Negative 1 plus 6i, and then divide both sides by 3, right? So x equal negative 1 plus 6i divided by 3. Okay? Now guys, don't make the mistake. Let me just kind of say this now, because I'm afraid some of you are going to do this. Some of you are going to want to reduce the 3 into 6, because it happens. So this is a mistake. What some of you are going to do is this. You're going to say 3 into 3 is 1, 3 into 6 is 2. And then you're going to say that's negative 1 plus 2i. That's not true. Because remember, how many terms are in this numerator? 2. All those terms have to be divided by 3. What you've done when you reduce just this, you said 3 only goes into this term. But 3 has to also go into what term? Negative 1. So that's not correct. If you want to rewrite it the way I'm about to, you can. There's nothing wrong with what I'm about to do. But that's negative 1 divided by 3 plus 6i divided by 3. That's what that is. And then you can reduce now. Negative 1/3 plus, and what's 6 divided by 3? What's 6 divided by 3? 2. 2i. So that is the correct one right here. But you don't have to do that. You just leave it like this. This is your answer. You're done. But I'm just saying that if for some reason you go and do this, I can't give you full credit, even though you have this, because mathematically you did something wrong. Okay? So don't make that mistake. That's a very common mistake people make. They see 6 and 3 and they want to reduce that, but you got to remember the 3 also needs to go into the negative 1. So it's got to look like this. All right, now the other way you could have written it, instead of, oh, I forgot the other one, did I? All right, so subtract 1, you get 3x equal what? Negative 1 minus 6i. And then you're going to divide both sides by 3. So what's the other solution? Yeah, so there you have two solutions. So those are your answers right here. But what I'm saying, remember when we did the irrational solutions a while ago? So you can write this as, I'm going to do it here, 3x plus 1 equal plus or minus 6i. Leave it as plus or minus 6i. So you're going to subtract 1, and then you're going to say 3x equal what? Negative 1 plus or minus 6i. And then finally divide by 3. And what's your solutions? Negative 1 plus or minus 6i all over 3. Okay, so either one's fine, doesn't matter. But you're going to have one of these, either it could be an irrational or it could be imaginary solutions on your test Thursday. All right, it's not hard to do. Those are easy points to get. Okay, now, so that's solving a quadratic equation by using a square root property. So now what's going to happen in the next part of the lesson is we're going to solve quadratic equations using the quadratic formula. And that's the easy thing to deal with. It's not difficult. So if you can kind of do what we did here, you should be okay.